Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. We are going to go ahead and get started promptly because I know we have a short amount of time together today. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us for our monthly Lunch and Learn series, where today we will be talking about managing your inner critic. Very exciting topic. And my name is Simone Figueroa. I am the president of Youth Thrive Educational Services. And for those of you who we have not had the opportunity of partnering with, just a little bit about our organization. We provide proactive mental and emotional wellness solutions to colleges and universities to equip college students with the skills needed to manage stress, become more resilient, and ultimately not just survive, but truly thrive throughout their undergraduate experience and beyond. And I am so excited to be joined by one of our key contributors and esteemed guest, Dr. Tara Cousineau. And before I turn it over to Tara to take it away, I'll share just a little bit more about her. So Tara Cousineau is a clinical psychologist and author. She currently works as a staff psychologist at Harvard University's Counseling Center. She is the author of The Kindness Cure: How the Science of Compassion Can Heal Your Heart, and an upcoming book that will be releasing next year, The Perfectionist Dilemma, which I'm very excited to read. Dr. Cousineau is a mindfulness meditation teacher and on faculty at the Center for Mindfulness and Compassion, Cambridge Health Alliance in Cambridge, Massachusetts. She is a trained facilitator in mindfulness education, including the Mindful Self-Compassion for Teens curriculum and the Mindfulness Institute for Emerging Adults program. She is a founder of Kind Minds, which is devoted to bringing kindfulness practices to individuals, schools, and workplaces through speaking engagements and workshops. And Tara, we're so excited to have you. And with that, I will turn it on over.
Okay, great. It's great to be here, to be invited. I'm going to share my screen in a moment, and so we can get through the didactic part. And I apologize if I speed through it because there's a lot to say in a short amount of time. So I'm going to share. All right. I'm assuming that you all can see that. So the topic of choice today is managing your inner critic. We all have them. And my approach today is going to be very, very simple. First, I'll start out with this quote: "To be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment." Of course, this was written, decades, a century ago, and it's really applicable right now, especially in working with emerging adults and college students, graduate students, where everything is about rating and ranking, trying to get ahead, a success-oriented mindset, and it's a lot of pressure. So today I'm going to go through a very simple skill that I call notice, name, and nurture when it comes to identifying your own inner critical narrative. So we'll begin with noticing. And obviously, I mean, I'm a mindfulness teacher, and awareness is always the first step, and you can't change what you don't know, right? So the first thing is just to really learn how to tune in to your thoughts and your feelings, your behaviors, your bodily sensations in particular. People just don't pay a whole lot of mind, and so they overinterpret nervousness as panic sometimes, when our body is just going through these normal kinds of responses to the world. And if you don't really learn how to regulate those emotions, it becomes really difficult. On the flip side of that, we have a very trigger aware culture where almost anything can feel like a trigger. And so learning sort of to find this middle path of understanding what is it that I'm feeling, experiencing, what is the voice, what's the narrative in my mind, and it helps to actually learn how to externalize that voice instead of being blended or really identified with it, because that's usually where the problems begin, is that you actually believe that you are your inner critic. And so the approach that I take comes from a self-compassionate approach, is to actually recognize the inner narrative almost like an internal somatic cue, just like a heart palpitation, right? Is a cue like, oh, what's going on here? When you notice your inner critic, it's usually a cue as well that there's a part of you, not all of you, but a part of you that is feeling that something is important or nervous or threatening or challenging. So it's really about paying attention with kind awareness in a non-judgmental way. I always say it's like be a kind detective to what is going on in your internal life. So the other way that I describe, so I do work at Harvard, and sometimes, it's just very heady there, right? And so I use some more computer language sometimes of like noticing your inner algorithm. So whether it's the inner narrative, the inner critic, the inner algorithm, the point is that there is a behavioral mental pattern that has been around for a very long time. It just didn't show up yesterday. It's actually developed and been conditioned and reinforced over time. So you're going to get these worksheets later, but this is just something that I do when I introduce the concept of the inner critic, is to really notice the inner algorithms. When you notice what you're saying to yourself, is it a fear of failure? Is it a rejection sensitivity? Does a small setback feel like a really big mistake? Does that result in a sense of shame? Where does that come from? Sometimes people go into unconscious habits to self-soothe, like scrolling social media, for example. That's probably the most obvious one. And it can really result in overwhelm. So by really drilling down in a very kind way, not a sort of analysis paralysis, but a way to say, I'm really curious about this. And this is actually where my head goes. Some people are familiar with CBT. I think CBT is helpful at a certain step in a process, but you need to calm your nervous system first before you go to your head. That's my little bit about CBT. Start with the body, then go to the head. So noticing is the first step. And then the second piece that I often engage students in, and this is really kind of like the fun exercise. And before COVID, I was doing all of this in person, and now I mostly do it online. So I ask people to always have a notebook or sticky notes with them when they come to a workshop. And that is to actually, once you've identified that inner algorithm, and it's really about a fear of failure, for example, is to actually give it a name. And it could be really fun with giving your inner voice, or that particular inner voice, or that part, a name. Now, I tend to call my primary inner critic my plus one, because it just shows up everywhere. It goes everywhere. It'll go to the concert. It will, show up at a family event. If I go visit my 85-year-old mother, it's sitting in the back seat of the car, right? So who is your plus one, sort of that inner critical narrative that seems to kind of be ever present, and who's primarily probably calling a lot of the shots unnecessarily? So who is your plus one? This is also one of my favorite images of all time, because we definitely have a sidekick. Now, in the, I don't know how many years, 5 years of running Befriending the Inner Critic workshops and Overcoming Perfectionism workshops, I've sort of come up with my own constellation of very common inner critical voices. And these are the inner managers, essentially. So there's often an inner judge. It's the self-critical voice, very judgy. It believes that if you're perfect and do everything right, it's going to protect you from rejection or failure. So you can see that as sort of an inner judge, if you will, Judge Judy, for example. Another type is, I call it the drill sergeant, because it's also like an inner bully, but it's really the part that's saying, you got to do this and you got to do that, and don't forget to do this. It's like a judge, but it's actually really pushing you on, and it has this need for control and to be right. Often people with perfectionistic tendencies will not only be very critical of themselves, but they often will be critical of other people, right? So perfectionism is actually a very complex kind of characteristic. But if you tend to be critical of others, and this came up actually in a workshop last night, someone who basically self-identified as being actually pretty mean to other people as much as she is to herself. And part of that is because when we blame other people or angry at other people for not meeting some standard, it actually helps you bind your anxiety in the moment. It's a temporary fix. So I call that the drill sergeant, or the bully. And then there's the inner sleuth. So the inner sleuth came up like just out of the woodwork during COVID. People were isolated, they were alone, they were on the internet a lot, they were doom scrolling. They were wondering if something bad was going to happen to them or a family member. I mean, this is all realistic. I mean, there were real threats out in the world, and it just really kind of amplified a part to try to make sure that everything is okay, right? And so these are the folks that will come in and they can't stop doing the internet research, right? So they might have a sore throat and they think they have throat cancer, like that kind of a thing, right? Health phobias, things like that kind of come into this domain. And it's very understandable. And it comes, all of these sort of behaviors come from a very innocent place at first, but when they get amplified and reinforced, it really becomes more of that algorithm and that internal uh, inner voice. It's usually showed up sometime in childhood, and now it shows up again. There's the inner nitpicker. I have a story about the inner nitpicker. The first time I ever ran a Befriending the Inner Critic workshop, I had a student, she was in the design program, and in the graduate program or in any art and design schools, you have to actually, literally, it's like emotional exposure. You have to show your work in a hallway, in a public forum. You've got students, you've got professors, and everyone's judging your work. Literally, it's a judging situation. And this student actually had a really bad case of procrastination. And the procrastination manifested as, oh, I have to get this right. I need to have these great ideas. And so she would spend hours on end cleaning her workspace, her, her art desk, and then that would be clean. And then she would go to the rest of her apartment that she shared with other people. And, 24 hours later, she hadn't gotten anything done. It was a really this inner part that's trying to protect her from an experience of potential shame. So she decided when we did a naming exercise of, once you understand that this part of you is really trying to serve you in some way, like it's protecting you, because our bodies really don't like pain and our bodies will do anything to avoid it. She could have some compassion for that part of herself. And so she decided to call her nitpicker, her inner Monica, after the character on Friends. So if you're a Friends fan, Monica's always hard. She's moving the coffee mug around. She's cleaning things up. She wants everything in order. So that allowed her to get a little distance from this behavior to see like, oh, when inner Monica shows up, it's because she's worried, she's nervous, and is there to remind her to protect herself. So now she can actually talk and have a conversation with inner Monica and say, Monica, I know why you're showing up, but it's going to be okay. We're going to push through it. It's better to get started now than wait to the last minute. So we cultivate relationships with the inner critic. And then across the board, with high achievers in particular, they don't allow themselves to have any fun. They are working at the library all hours of night. They're not taking a break. They're not taking a mindfulness brain break. And it robs them of joy. And then they realize that a whole year has gone by and they hardly made any friends or things like that. So I call that the inner joy thief. And actually the inner joy thief, I feel like, is a sidekick of all of these others. But these are sort of the 5 major parts that I see that come to my workshops. And it's helpful just to notice like, oh, there's a part of you that seems to be robbing you of joy. Let's get curious about this. So naming an inner critic is really sort of like, it's the second step. You notice it and then you name it and then you start to take care of it. So in our culture, there's a lot of banishing the inner critic, get rid of it, get rid of all the pain, the hard stuff. I just have to get over it. No pain, no gain. And I'm just telling you right now, that's wrong. Really what you want to do is turn your attention towards caring for this part, being curious, taking a mindfulness stance. So this is where the skill of self-compassion comes on the scene. Now, most people have really adapted and gotten accustomed to their inner critical narrative. Sometimes they're just even not aware that it's there. But once they are, we can start working from a self-compassionate lens. And this is really like for a lot of people, and probably some of you here, I mean, I feel like it's a daily practice for me. It's a lifelong practice, is that we actually have to constantly flex the self-compassion muscle because our brains are always going to go towards the threat. Our brain is designed to go to what's negative. We see something on the news, somebody just hurt our feelings. We are going to dwell on that because that is how our neural networks are designed. It's the blueprint. So we have to really work, just like learning a new language, on being kinder to ourselves. So what is self-compassion? So Dr. Kristen Neff is a researcher at the University of Texas, and she has operationalized self-compassion in order for people to study it. And now, 10, 15 years later, there is a lot of research that shows that the practice of self-compassion is one of the best prescriptions for mental well-being. And it has three components. There's no order to these, but one component is mindfulness, is being aware of what's arising in your experience without judging it, having kind curiosity about it. I call it kindfulness, which is being aware of the present moment with heart, like really bringing in the heart energy. There is an element of common humanity, which is that you are not alone. I mean, you can't help it that your brain's designed with a negativity bias. You can't help it that our nervous systems are designed to protect yourself from any kind of pain, distress, or danger. You are not alone in the experience of human suffering. This is one reason why I really love doing workshops, because people can be so in their heads about things, but when they hear that other people are experiencing something similar to themselves and beating themselves up, they're like, oh my gosh, I'm not alone. I'm not crazy. So common humanity is a really important element to remind yourself that you're not alone. And then of course the self-kindness piece. And self-kindness piece is pretty much what you think, is being kind to yourself. The easiest brain hack is, can I be as kind to myself as I am to a friend who might be struggling in the same way? So if you had a friend that was, having test anxiety, or a friend who just had a breakup and was feeling terrible, or is homesick, is to really identify with that. And what would you say to that person? And I have people write this down, like, what would you say to a friend who's experiencing something similar? So it's an important way to get it, again, out of your head and onto the page. So that's self-compassion in a nutshell. And so the befriending piece, so my favorite word actually for self-compassion is befriending, is this exercise that I just told you. And when students start to write out what they would say to a friend, I ask them, well, what's their tone? And usually the tone is either very soft and gentle, or it's encouraging, like in an optimistic kind of way. And then turn it back to them and say, well, what do you think that you need to hear? When that inner judge shows up, right, and is saying, you got to do it right, you're doing it wrong, what do you need to hear? And when people can step back and consider that, often what they realize is, I just need somebody to give me a hug. I just need some reassurance, maybe I need to go for a walk and just get a change of scenery. So this is, again, it's sort of like I'm peeling the layers so that people are not blended with their inner critical voices. It's just a part of them that needs some tending to, just like you would to someone you really care about. Now, then there's this sort of transition to recognizing the inner critical voice, recognizing how to speak to yourself in a kind way, and then actually coming up with what I call power statements or empowering statements. And it's kind of like an affirmation or a mantra. And it's being clear, like using very simple language. It could be an I statement, it could be a you statement. And it has to mean something to you. It has to feel resonant in some way, because we see affirmations all over Instagram and they look nice and neat and simple, but you don't really connect with it. So really being authentic and true to your experience and using that kind attitude, and you write it down and then you put it on a sticky note and you put it on your computer, or you make a little meme for yourself and you put it as your screensaver on your phone, your computer, whatever. You write it on a little note card and you change it up over time, because otherwise after a week it's going to be like, oh, this doesn't mean anything to me anymore. So variety is important in this too, is to kind of keep producing and churning out these positive affirmations. And when you do it, when your nervous system is calm, it's much easier to take it in. Now, I did this last night, this exact exercise, so the timing is perfect, actually. What happens when people say, well, I can't do that? I can't be nice to myself. Like, how do you even do that? There is a lot of resistance to taking in the good. And so here's my answer to them. It's try anyway. because it's like learning a new language. You have to get accustomed to it, and it's going to feel, like if you're trying to learn Spanish or French for the first time, you don't know what the words are, but you start to practice, right? The second thing is that you hold the paradox, because what we don't want to do is toxic positivity, right? Which is just trying to replace the negative with the positive and, yeehaw, everything's all good. That is not what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is actually hold the paradox. And so the way to do that is using or turning that affirmation or that power statement into an even though statement. So here are some examples, and these are the ones actually I sent in a follow-up message to my group. So you're getting it really fresh off the press. And this was in relation to some of the stories that these students shared yesterday. Even though it's hard to be kind to myself, I accept all of me and how I feel. Even though I don't quite believe I am worthy or I'm smart enough or whatever enough, I completely accept and love myself anyway. Even though part of me believes I am never doing enough, I recognize where that comes from, and I'm working towards releasing this belief. So you can kind of see that we're starting to work around the edges. It's like self-compassion, kind of like from the edges and moving in. So these are some of the ways to actually turn an affirmation into something that might be more palpable and digestible until you can get to a very firm statement that says, I am worthy of love and belonging. I deserve to be here. For those people who feel like they've got imposter syndrome, I deserve to be here. I made it here. I did that on my own merit. So they might not be able to do an I statement really clearly, but they might be able to do an even though statement. And this is sort of the juxtaposition of a worksheet that you'll also get in an email of noticing the inner critic, doing that sort of noticing and naming, and then starting to befriend the inner critic with power statements. So you will get that. But I will pause here for any questions because I see that we're at 12:20. Let me unshare. Okay. So Simone, I just unshared and wondering if there's any questions from the audience that I might be able to answer.
Yeah, please feel free to type in the chat if you have any questions or comments. Tara, I remember the first time hearing about the inner critic from you and this idea of labeling it, and it was really kind of refreshing to create this space and recognizing that I am not my inner critic. So it's been like a really powerful practice.
Yeah.
We have a question. I'm wondering how many students typically attend your online workshops on this topic?
Oh, well, that really varies. I mean, participation is really hard when people are oversubscribed in their lives. So I would say like 12, like a dozen, I'll get like 25 or 50 to sign up. And so my algorithm is if 50 show up or 50 sign up, about a third of them will actually come to the group. And the way that I do my workshop, so I do 8 weeks, like for the Overcome Perfectionism is 8 weeks and it's psycho ed. So it's part didactic and part sharing. So it's not group therapy. And I've learned to set it up as a drop-in. So I tell everyone that the greatest benefit is to come to all of them, but to come to as many as you can. And sometimes people will come in a little bit later. And that's because of the environment of the university that I work at. I mean, people are pulled aside by their advisors. It's just one thing after another. So I don't want to have any barriers to have it being a closed group and then you have to sign up and then continue through. And I actually find that works the best. And also students there's always like a core that come every week. They actually become the co-facilitators because they've been learning the skills along the way. So if a student comes in, say at session 4 or 5, I've already got my co-teachers. So I found that has worked in the particular environment that I'm in.
You have a comment from Gina. Thank you for this workshop and for providing an alternative for students that they do not believe their self-statements. Yes, I think toxic positivity is definitely something that permeates the culture. And so I really appreciate it as well, the alternative to how to think about this and accepting where you're at and maybe where you want to be. We have a question. What are some other affirmations we can say to people who do not feel adequate enough?
Well, in addition to some of the ones that I showed, it really is kind of like a co-construction. And sometimes I will ask a student or a client to name several times, if they can think of it. This is a good homework, actually, of when they felt their best self in their life. Like any time in their life. It could have been when they're 8 years old, it could have been 14, it could have been, like some point in their life where they actually felt like really fully alive. And that becomes sort of the seed for being really curious, because there was something about that moment or that experience where they might have felt proud of themselves, or they felt really validated or heard, or they did something really hard that they didn't think they could do. And then you can start from there. Um, like, I can do hard things, right? I mean, a simple statement like that. Um, so you kind of, I feel like the more customized and tailored, the better. I mean, I seriously like have a running list of them. They're not in front of me. And what I do is sometimes I will have like, let me show you like a little note card. Let's see. So like I'll have little cards like this, you can probably see, and I'll write it down with a student. Like when they've kind of constructed something that they could kind of digest, I'll put it on a card and hand it to them so it's tangible. So it's not like, oh, that was a nice conversation I had, now I'm going to go in the world and forget about it. Is I'll actually make it really concrete. So that's another strategy.
I love that. Someone said, thank you for sharing this concept. Not only is it a wonderful topic to discuss with students, but also a great self-care tool for professionals. Yes, that's exactly right. I think the proverbial oxygen mask, you have
Yes.
to put your own oxygen mask on first before you can help others, like is definitely applicable. And the whole premise and hope is that we're sharing concepts with you that you could apply to your own life, and then I'll obviously take out into the work that you do with students.
Yeah, this is really a lifelong practice. I mean, I have somebody in my private practice who's 75 years old. I've actually known her now for 30 years. She was one of my first clients ever. She still comes once a month. Like, I don't think you need me anymore. But what she's been able to do is to kind of externalize that part of her that makes her really anxious. And she calls it her little anxiety. And she just imagines herself holding little anxiety's hand, just like she would a child. That's why I use a lot of imagery of children, because these parts actually come from an earlier place and an earlier time, and we all need to do it. And it doesn't, it doesn't matter what age. So yeah, definitely, it's a good self-care strategy.
Someone asked, how do you practice kindness and self-compassion?
Well, so I have a little ritual. You should go to my blog. Actually, I think tomorrow I might be posting something on my blog about this. What is it, tomorrow, March 1st? Because I got that question from a client a few weeks ago. I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to put this in a blog. So you're just going to have to go tomorrow. But basically, I have cultivated sort of a self-care ritual where about 3 to 4 times a week, I have a little corner in my home office. It's on the floors, bunch of pillows, books there, affirmation cards, and a journal, and my playlist, that I have, and I sit for 15 to 20 minutes. And if I don't get to it, I just know that my corner is there. So part of it is actually creating the environmental cues to remind yourself, oh, it's just like having the pair of sneakers or the yoga mat at the door, or I'll wear yoga pants to work because I'm like, maybe I can catch that class on the way home. Because we have to actually keep reminding ourselves over and over and over again. And the more you do it, and the more it becomes a habit, it becomes a non-negotiable in your life. So I will just tell my family, don't bother me for the next 20 minutes. I have, a hotel sign on my door, do not disturb meditating that I found somewhere. So things like that can be really helpful. And the last thing I'll say, because I think this really applies to the younger audience as well, is as a meditation practice is what we mindfulness teachers call cultivating a puppy mind. So instead of, being so upset that your mind is going off in a zillion, directions, is that to see your thoughts like a puppy that you're training, right? And if you have a puppy and it's peeing on the floor and chewing up the socks, you're not going to kick the puppy. You're not going to be mean to the puppy. You're going to say, oh my gosh, come here, let's start over. So part of it is really cultivating this puppy mind, in the presentation, I have a picture of a puppy because it helps. It helps just to conjure out the oxytocin that you get from seeing like a cute little animal, but to also see your mind as a cute little animal that's just rambunctious and it's just going off. And so to really tend to the thoughts that arise just as thoughts, this is just practice. You start over again and over again and over again.
Thanks, Tara. So we'll take one last question because I know we're at time here. Have you found this to work well to combat negative intrusive thoughts?
Oh, absolutely. But with negative, so those statements are really powerful to be able to say, even though I'm having this intrusive thought, I completely accept the fact that I'm having this thought. Right? So you're holding the paradox. And then I also include a technique that's called emotional freedom technique, which is a tapping on the side of the hand here, because that actually helps to diminish the nervous system reaction, like starting from the body first. So I think that a lot of the cognitive approaches actually are bypassing the body. And so if you can help somebody, breathe, diaphragmatic breathing, doing a little tapping on the acupressure points that are known to calm the nervous system, and then be able to do these sort of cognitive reframes or tend to the inner critic, I find that that works the best.
Well, thank you so much, Tara, for being here with us today. I will put my email up on the screen here in case anybody has any additional questions that they'd like for me to pass along. And we will be circulating this recording along with those 2 handouts that Tara generously sent to us if you want to continue practicing these skills. And just a heads up about our upcoming event that we'll be hosting in March, March 21st. We will be doing a learning lab where if you're interested in actually experiencing these skills through the lens of a student and how we share these with students, feel free to sign up for that event. And we look forward to seeing you at that event or future events. And I'll put that in the chat. And thank you guys so much for taking the time to join us today. And we look forward to seeing you at future events. Thanks, everybody.